Chapter 25. Though the absence of the fleet reassured Ashalia and her cortege, Monty's departure seemed to lessen the shine of the sun, and the trek back to the summit proved far more somber than any seemed comfortable with. True, the conference had been a success, but should Almid, Ashalia, or Lamont fail to hold up their respective ends, the war would continue on, just as complicated as ever. While the boy had been under their care, none had considered just exactly what sort of danger they had sent him to deal with, but now the possible fates he could face seemed vivified before them all. Ash, too, feared for her own effectiveness, for she still had no idea where to find Marquis Andor, and worried that even should she locate him, she would have no luck in convincing him to stand down his forces. Indeed, she had helped in training them, preparing them to bring about the end of the Empire, but suddenly the violence of war appeared nothing more than a dark cloud overshadowing the peace that stood just barely out of reach. She regretted having bred her troops for war, now seeing that they may never even have to face a single battle, but at the same time a minuscule, withdrawn part of her hoped that the plan would fail, if only so that the resistance could serve its purpose, for better or for worse. However, as they rounded a turn in the stony path, rising pillars of smoke drew her attention to the settlement at which they had taken shelter just days ago. Snow-covered trees hindered her view, but she spotted an Arcadian airship about the size of the straw resting silently in the snow not too far off, and in an instant she knew that they should flee the area, but she could not bring herself to do so.
"My God!"
she muttered, picking up pace.
"Princess!"
Bosch called after her. The others ran at their heels, not about to let the town that had so kindly welcomed them be burned to the ground, but upon their arrival, they found that their efforts had been mustered too late. Much of the village still stood, but it had been cleared of residents, save for the dead ones that had been left behind in the hasty exodus. Avoiding the sights of a small gathering of soldiers that busied itself boarding in atomos to return to the fleet, Ashalia and her cortege made for the great cathedral outside of the settlement, all fearing what may have become of the Grand Kiltias. All too soon were their fears confirmed, for they found the cathedral doors wide open, splintered, barely hanging from their ornate hinges, and there before the cracked altar in the great hall beyond, surrounded by shattered glass and torn tapestries, stood Judge Bergen, his back to them and his sword drawn. Arcadian soldiers hovered near the room's perimeter, only 4 of them it seemed, focused intently on destroying the last treasures of the temple and unaware of the group's presence. Their entrance did not go completely unnoticed, however, for the judge glanced over his shoulder with a small screech of steel, shooting the princess a glare of welcoming amusement.
"Ah, our vagrant princess!"
He turned fully now, his armor creaking as his feet rose and clanking as they fell, and there behind him they at last saw the crumpled, bleeding body of the Grand Kiltias, still and ashen, clearly devoid of life.
"Too late, and to their sorrow do those who misplace their trust in gods learn their fate,"
Bergen continued.
"It's a shame such fools go down in history as martyrs." "You bastard!"
Ash sneered, noting the advance of the 4 soldiers at the chamber's flanks.
"This is neutral territory, you have no right." "This war can only be won in absolute,"
he insisted, halting his approach a few yards before her.
"Those who don't surrender to us are opposed to us. Neutrality is only a matter of semantics." "Honestly,"
said Bolthier,
"why even bother trying to justify yourself anymore? Can't you at least have the decency to admit you're a selfing jackass?" "I've found etiquette to be the most glaring difference between a judge and a pirate,"
Bergen quipped. Bolthier smirked.
"And I suppose competence ranks a close second, right?"
Bergen laughed.
Fair, if nothing else. I'll admit you're a hard man to keep up with, though I suppose I should thank you for providing me with such ample entertainment as of late. I do try. Now why not be civil and let Her Majesty admit defeat with honor?
Vaughn and Bosch both stepped closer to Ash's side, but neither drew his sword just yet.
Stay away from her,
Vaughn warned.
She's trying to settle this without killing people. Why do you want to get in her way? Sacrifices must be made,
said Bergen.
It is better that they be deserving. The Grand Kiltias was deserving,
Ash growled.
For aiding and abetting a traitor to the Empire.
Bergen scoffed in reply.
More deserving than most I have brought to justice. Do you truly have no concept of peace outside of submission?
The princess demanded.
The longer you oppress your conquered subjects, the more they will grow to hate you. And you're no exception, are you?
He shot back.
Swift has your lust for revenge led you to Rythwal's sword. If you know what's good for you, you'll hand it over. Vayne may take it as an offering of apology and spare your life. Apology? For kidnapping his only heir, of course.
She sneered disbelievingly, fighting the urge to shake her head.
We did no harm to Lamont. If anything, we rescued him. And just any criminal knows what's best for him. I am no more a criminal than Vayne.
The judge's hand jerked subtly, lifting his blade upward and then outward, a quick containment of his ire that nevertheless caused both Bosch and Vaughn to reach for their swords, and the 4 Arcadians surrounding them to mirror the gesture. Balthier seemed utterly disgusted.
With your people at his mercy,
Bergen growled,
you would do well to speak higher of him. I will speak of him only what he has earned,
she snapped,
and in sending his troops to massacre a harmless village, he has lost anything I ever may have owed him.
The Arcadian soldiers that encroached on them finally closed the gap at the splintered doors and grew still, their prey surrounded, but their orders not yet given. Bergen stepped forward.
You underestimate the severity of your crime. The treaty your father signed in Nalbina sold you to Vayne in marriage. Perhaps if you were his family, you would treat Lord Lamont as the nobility he is and not use him for your own selfish gain. My father would do no such thing to me, and neither would I to Lamont.
He released a biting laugh, then proceeded forward as he spoke, clipping the consonants like the high-born Arcadian that he was.
Hereditary treachery plagues your line, it is unfit to rule a household, let alone a country. Your people will rejoice more in your death than in your ascension.
Balthier drew his sword with such swiftness that none even noticed his hand dart to the hilt.
Back off, Bergen,
he warned quietly.
I'm the one you want.
Bergen tilted his head and spoke smilingly.
Arrogant as ever, I see. Can your ego not accept the premise of killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Sid will have your head, if I don't first. You always did have to learn the hard way.
The 2 quickly met blades, Bergen striking first and Balthier easily matching his speed, and the 4 soldiers that surrounded the others descended upon them with violent haste. One fell immediately, impaled by his hapless charge, the victim of ill luck and Bosch's extensive skill, but the others fared better, forcing their opponents into a vulnerable cluster. Balthier and Bergen sparred recklessly, throwing one another against the remaining pews and the piles of debris, struggling to floor each other in the hopes of opening a fatal gap in defense. Ash fought to break away from the back-to-back group, but Penelo, inexperienced and trembling with fear, could not hold her own against any of the ruthless soldiers, and so the princess remained at the aid of her bodyguards. Fran broke the standoff, lashing out at the nearest soldier and engaging him in a match of dodging and parrying that gave her comrades a moment in which to catch the other two off guard. One soldier lunged at the group, meeting Vaughn's blade while Penelo cowered behind him, her sword readied clumsily in the hopes that its presence might make her attackers think twice before singling her out. Ash and Bosch charged the third soldier, finding him skilled enough to ward both of them off for quite some time. However, Ash soon left the squabble to aid Vaughn and Penelo, for she knew that neither had much battle experience. Her arrival proved quite timely, for Vaughn fell to the stone floor with a jarring thud, and the soldier responsible turned his rage on Penelo. He struck once, and she blocked it, then again, and her luck held, but his third strike fell short as Vaughn tripped him before he could land it. The soldier delivered a brawny blow to Vaughn's jaw, and Penelo responded by kicking him in the stomach. Now thoroughly enraged, he grabbed Penelo's delicate ankle and dragged her to the floor with him, then rose to his knees, placing one on her stomach to immobilize her, and regained his sword while Vaughn still helplessly recovered. The soldier moved no farther, however, for Ash hacked into his shoulder from behind, nearly decapitating him before he hit the ground.
"Hey!"
Penelo protested gratefully.
"We're supposed to be protecting you."
Ash looked up, eyes trained on Bolthier and Bergen as they disappeared into the rear chamber of the cathedral, swords still swinging.
"With all due respect," she replied, "you'll have to catch me first."
Vaughn rolled to his feet and flexed his jaw with a wince.
"Better get going, then." "Come on,"
Ash added, dashing forward.
"Wait up!"
cried Penelo. Fran finally dispatched her foe and turned to see the three follow her partner, and Bosch's opponent, suffering a deep wound, fled the church at his first opportunity. Rather than take up the chase and finish him off, Bosch traced Fran's gaze.
"She followed them?"
he asked.
"Seems so,"
she answered. Bosch rolled his eyes, heading for the back door with a muffled sigh of exhaustion.
"Just like Rassler,"
he muttered. Silently, Fran followed. Ash arrived to a scene of heated rage nearing its end, with Vaughn and Penelo steps behind her and Bosch and Fran steps behind them. Compared to the mess in the temple's vestibule and public chamber, the small back room seemed fairly well treated. A gash marred the rich carpet, the casualty of a blade dragged across it and upwards in defense, and one row of curtains hung loose from their post, exposing the jagged mountainside that dropped off at the building's edge, but no other damage presented, either to the room or the combatants within it. Bolthier had the upper hand as the princess entered, dodging a quick strike and using Bergen's momentum to slam him into a corner hard enough to knock his blade to the floor, but in her rush to aid him, Ash mistakenly did just the opposite.
"Bolthier!"
He turned, kicking Bergen's sword away, but otherwise letting his guard down.
"Are you trying to get yourself caught?"
Disarmed but undaunted, Bergen laid a crushing grip on Bolthier's wrist, holding his blade at bay, and with the other arm he shoved the pirate back against the high-rising windows that overlooked the steep ravine beyond. A panel of glass shattered, briefly blinding Bolthier, and though he maintained his grip on his sword, one more push could easily send him over the edge.
"Ungrateful to the end,"
Bergen sneered. Ash, acting on instincts yet unknown to her, lunged at Bergen, forcing her sword under a plate of armor with all her might and by some divine grace striking flesh. She received an elbow to the nose for her efforts, releasing the hilt of her blade and falling to the floor, but she had bought Bolthier enough time to gather his wits. Bergen still held the pirate's right hand fast, rendering his sword useless, but Ashalia's sword remained in the judge's side, an almost comically convenient lever. Bergen's right hand darted toward the wound, and Balthier's left followed it, grabbing hold of the blade. Bending low and digging his shoulder into the judge's stomach, he flipped him behind him through the broken window, breaking another in the process, and flicked his own sword downward against Bergen's arm, causing him to release his grasp and fall freely to the icy river below, his armor sending a resounding series of echoing clanks throughout the mountains. The others approached Ash, helping her up as she wiped a considerable amount of blood from her nose, and Fran joined Balthier at the window, leaning out carefully to better see the result of Bergen's final battle. Balthier tried to slow his breath as Ash stepped to his other side, sheathing Bergen's sword at her hip, as he had taken hers down the cliff with him. With an expression of slight anger that quickly melted to genuine concern, Balthier deftly wiped some blood from the princess's chin, only to have his hand swiped away.
"Don't think you're getting a discount for that,"
he said, little emotion evident in his voice.
"Don't think I did it for you,"
she replied.
"This will cost us dearly, you know,"
Bosch pointed out calmly, glancing over the ledge.
"Yeah,"
added Vaughn.
"We gotta get out of here." "Agreed,"
said Ash, striding slowly back to the cathedral's main hall.
"But it's a long road back to the ship. And we're low on supplies,"
Balthier muttered. The silence of the great chamber grew incalculably denser in the wake of the brawl, the cloven altar at the front a reminder of the holy treachery imposed on the settlement, the splintered double doors at the back an echo of pain and injustice. Penelo turned her gaze upward, studying the elegant chandeliers and comforting ceiling beams that remained intact, likely solely because their lofty position held them out of the attacker's reach.
"So, what are you saying?"
she asked, stepping lightly as though fearing a disruption of the temple's holiness.
"We steal? Haven't they been through enough? There's more food here than people,"
Balthier explained tiredly, not bothering to look at her.
"But they helped us." "Penelo,"
Vaughn stepped in, standing at her side as she slowed to a stop.
"A lot of people are dead now, they're not gonna use it. We won't take more than we need." "I know, but it'll be all right,"
Bosch added.
"We'll tell them what we're doing. They'll probably volunteer." "I know I would,"
said Ash, staring at the Grand Kiltias, and then setting her jaw and crossing the room, looking over the wreckage as though in search of something. She swooned a little, but hid it well, and then bent her delicate wrist and rubbed it over her mouth, wiping away still more blood. Penelo bit her lips slightly, but seemed at ease with this answer. Bosch's eyes remained softly trained on her, and while she did not notice, Vaughn did, though the Landesian quickly shook himself out of whatever trance had taken him without any prompt. Fran hesitantly neared the Grand Kiltias, her ears perked warily, her eyes trained on the withered old man, who slouched in a puddle of blood at her feet.
"Why would they do this?"
she questioned distantly. An answer readied itself in Vaughn's mind, but he had grown wise enough to know better than to voice it. Indeed, he had grown wise enough to know better than to believe it. He wanted the Arcadians to be responsible for this, but knew he could not be so brought in as his blame. There were reasons other than nationality for what had transpired here, and whether he cared for them or not, whether he understood them or not, he would have to acknowledge them sooner or later.
"People,"
he said slowly,
"have different ideas of right and wrong."
Balthier, too, looked over the corpse with consoling eyes, and spoke quietly.
"He didn't have to be a threat to be perceived as one."
Fran shook her head, but said nothing.
Shouldn't we do something?
Asked Penelo, holding her small fists to her mouth timidly. Ash approached with a large panel of drapery that had fallen from the temple windows, and she spread it out in the air before her, laying it carefully over the lifeless form.
Their burial rites are very sacred,
she explained. Bosch looked over the ruined temple with a heavy sigh.
At least Monty didn't have to see any of this. He may have it worse now that he's back under Vane's control,
Ash added.
Don't worry,
said Penelo.
He's not easily controlled. So what now, Princess?
Balthier asked.
If you won't destroy your own rock, does that mean we're going after Vane's? I suppose so,
she answered.
Maybe it's a good thing you didn't chop up the Midlight Shard,
Vaughn suggested.
This is all getting out of hand, even if it's worthless, we can at least use it to scare them a little. I doubt we can scare them enough to get anywhere near the Dusk Shard,
said Bosch.
Does anybody even know where it is?
Penelo asked.
I can venture a guess,
Balthier replied somewhat bitterly.
Drakler Laboratory, in Arcades. The Empire's weapons research begins and ends there. Oh, man!
Vaughn growled.
Don't tell me we're going there. Sorry,
said Ash.
If that's where it is, that's where we're going.
Bosch suppressed a groan.
Never mind that it's the capital of the very country that seeks to have us all killed. Well,
Balthier quipped,
it also happens to be my hometown. I can get us in faster than Vaughn can get himself arrested. Hey!
Vaughn injected.
Let me guess,
Ash added, folding her arms and rolling her eyes.
Balfonheim Port. Now how would a princess come to know of that?
Balthier asked with a smirk.
Lamont spoke of it,
she answered.
He said he knows someone worthy of our trust there.
The pirate nodded, his eyes somewhat troubled, but his demeanor otherwise normal.
Yes, an old friend of Vane's, though they're not on such good terms these days. That's a good thing, isn't it?
Asked Vaughn.
More or less,
said Balthier.
At any rate, he poses less danger than the lab. You all could stay at the port while Fran and I get the job done. Don't be ridiculous,
Ash growled.
I am not just leaving my country's fate to a pair of pirates. You can't just walk into Arcades, either,
said Bosch.
I can and I will,
she snapped.
You'll be dead in 5 minutes,
he contended.
Not if you do your job. Princess.
Penelo stepped in, one hand twirling nervously in her hair.
Maybe you should just let them handle it. I mean, they're professionals, after all. That's what concerns me,
Ash replied in a low, calm tone. Balthier gave her a deliberate scowl, not out of offense that she should think such a thing, but out of anger that she should correctly think such a thing. Still, he remained convinced that if she failed to destroy one stone, she would invariably fail to destroy another, and once she possessed the Dusk Shard, she would move on to the final conquest, the Dawn Shard, and before long, there would be no semblance of her former self left to the world. She would no longer be Ash, just as Sid was no longer Sid.
Let's not jump to conclusions, Highness,
he said coldly.
I can't rob you until you've paid me, and I'm expecting more than a piece of nethysite. This is startin' to sound familiar.
Vaughn groaned.
You should consider your options until the last possible moment, Princess,
said Fran.
Where Nethysite is concerned, your trust would be better placed in us than in Redas.
Ash wrinkled her nose.
A dark truth if ever I heard one. And who is Redas?
Penelo asked.
A pirate,
Balthier answered.
A damn good one. Some call him the Pirate King even,
added Fran.
That doesn't sound good,
said Bosch.
Normally, it wouldn't be,
she went on,
but he will not harm us so long as we do no harm to him. He's partial to Monty,
said Balthier.
We'd have to do a lot to piss him off. Well,
Ash replied,
let's get going, then. We've brought enough trouble to Baromi Sace as it is. Princess,
Bosch protested,
you can't be serious. Quit whining, Captain,
she groaned.
How much can go wrong with you around to protect me?
He tilted his head slightly.
Was that some sad form of flattery or just another order? Come on,
she growled, rolling her eyes and stomping off.
Either way,
said Vaughn,
I don't think we have a choice.
Bosch shook his head and followed after the princess, while Penelo skipped forward eagerly.
We're really going to Arcadia?
She cooed.
Seems so,
Balthier answered, walking at her side.
Try not to pick up too many more boyfriends.
She came to a stop, scowling at him as he continued on ahead, and then swatted Vaughn upon hearing his muffled snicker. Their journey back down the mountain and through the jungle would be a sorrowful one, but a strange comfort proved their reward. Somehow, despite the better judgments of a few, they all had come to look on the Strahl as a haven, and even in trekking toward the unknown perils of their murky future, each felt a small sense of going home.